poisoned on Waterloo Bridge. Georgi Markov was a Bulgarian dissident living in exile in London, working as a broadcaster for the BBC World Service. To the Bulgarian government and to the Soviet intelligence apparatus behind them, he was a problem that needed to be removed. On September 7, 1978, Markov made his usual commute into the city. It was an ordinary morning. He crossed Waterloo Bridge on his way to work, moving through the flow of pedestrians heading into central London. Somewhere on that bridge, he felt a sudden sharp sting in the back of his right thigh. He turned. A man standing behind him with an umbrella offered a brief apology and walked away. Markov noted the moment but continued on to work. He told colleagues what had happened. He showed them a small red mark on his leg. By that evening, he had developed a fever. Over the following days, his condition worsened. Doctors admitted him to hospital. His temperature rose and his body began to fail in ways that could not immediately be explained. Medical staff worked to identify the cause. On September 11th, 4 days after the incident on the bridge, Georgi Markov died. During the investigation that followed, a pathologist found a tiny pellet embedded in the tissue of his right thigh. The pellet was made of platinum and iridium, drilled with a small cavity. Testing confirmed the cavity had contained ricin, a poison with no known antidote. The modified umbrella had been used to fire the pellet directly into his leg. British investigators concluded that the Bulgarian Secret Service carried out the operation. The KGB provided the technical expertise and the weapon itself. No one was ever charged in a British court. Murdered by umbrella stairwell. Lev Rebet was a Ukrainian political theorist living in exile in Munich. He worked among the Ukrainian diaspora community in West Germany, writing and organizing from a distance. Soviet intelligence had been watching him. In 1957, the KGB assigned the operation to an agent named Bogdan Stashinsky. He had been trained in the use of a specially designed weapon, a spray pistol built to fire a jet of hydrogen cyanide at close range. The device was compact enough to conceal and fast enough that the target would have no warning. On October 12, 1957, Rebet arrived at his office building in Munich and began climbing the stairwell. Stashinsky was already inside waiting. As Rebet moved through the stairwell, Stashinsky discharged the weapon directly into his face and walked out of the building. Rebet collapsed on the stairs. He was found shortly afterward. When authorities examined the body, they found no signs of violence. No wounds, no struggle, nothing to indicate anything other than a sudden medical event. The death was ruled a heart attack. The case was closed. For 4 years, the truth remained buried. Then, in 1961, Stashinsky defected to West Germany and surrendered himself to authorities. He confessed to both the Rebet killing and a second operation carried out 2 years later. His testimony was the only reason investigators ever learned what had actually happened in that stairwell. West German authorities put Stashinsky on trial. The court found him guilty of the killings. In sentencing, the judges noted that the primary responsibility lay not with the man who operated the weapon, but with the state that ordered its use. Stashinsky received an 8-year sentence. Cyanide in the stairwell. Stepan Bandera was a Ukrainian nationalist leader living in exile in Munich. He had spent years organizing resistance movements against Soviet rule from abroad, which made him one of the most wanted figures on the KGB's list of targets outside the Eastern Bloc. The KGB assigned the operation to Bogdan Stashinsky, the same agent who had killed Lev Rebet in the same city 2 years earlier. The weapon was identical, a spray pistol designed to discharge a jet of hydrogen cyanide at close range, leaving no visible wound. On October 15, 1959, Bandera returned to his apartment building in the Kreitmeierstrasse area of Munich. He entered the building and moved toward the stairwell. Stashinsky was waiting inside. As Bandera passed through the stairwell, Stashinsky fired the weapon into his face and left the building. Bandera was found shortly afterward, collapsed in the stairwell. His keys were still in his hand. Authorities examined the body and, as with Rebet 2 years prior, found no signs of physical violence. The death was ruled a heart attack. A prominent exile leader had died, and the case drew significant attention across the Ukrainian diaspora community in Europe, but the official findings stood. The truth only surfaced when Stashinsky defected to West Germany in 1961 and confessed to both killings. He told investigators everything: the weapon, the method, the orders he had received. At his trial in West Germany, Stashinsky was convicted. The court's judgment was notable. It held that the weight of criminal responsibility rested with the Soviet state that had directed the operation, not solely with the man who carried it out. Stashinsky was sentenced to 8 years in prison. Chocolates in Rotterdam. Yevhen Konovalets was the leader of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, one of the most active anti-Soviet resistance movements operating in Western Europe during the 1930s. Soviet intelligence had been tracking him for years. The NKVD, the forerunner to the KGB, assigned the operation to an agent named Pavel Sudoplatov. His task was to get close to Konovalets personally and deliver the weapon directly into his hands. Sudoplatov spent time building access to Konovalets, presenting himself as a sympathizer with the nationalist cause. The approach worked. By the spring of 1938, Sudoplatov had earned enough trust to arrange a face-to-face meeting. On May 23, 1938, the two men met at a cafe in Rotterdam, in the Netherlands. Sudoplatov arrived carrying a gift. It was a box of chocolates wrapped and presented as a token for Konovalets. Inside the box was an explosive device rigged to detonate after a set period of time. Sudoplatov handed Konovalets the box during the meeting, then excused himself and left the cafe. A short time later, the device detonated. The explosion killed Konovalets immediately. The cafe was damaged. Witnesses in the area reported the blast. Dutch authorities responded to the scene and found Konovalets dead. Sudoplatov escaped from Rotterdam and made his way out of Western Europe. He later rose through the ranks of Soviet intelligence, eventually becoming one of its senior figures. Decades later, he described the Rotterdam operation in detail in his published memoirs, providing the most complete account of how the killing was planned and carried out. No one was charged in connection with the death of Yevhen Konovalets in a Dutch or international court, shot near Lausanne. Ignace Reis was a senior Soviet intelligence officer who in 1937 decided he was done. After years working for Soviet intelligence across Europe, Reis broke from the organization and sent an open letter directly to the Central Committee in Moscow. In it, he denounced Stalin by name and declared his support for Leon Trotsky's opposition movement. It was one of the most public defections any Soviet intelligence figure had attempted. He knew what it meant. Reis went into hiding in Switzerland with his family, moving between locations and trying to stay ahead of any response from Moscow. The NKVD moved quickly. An operation was organized to find him and eliminate him before he could pass more information to Western intelligence services or cause further damage through public statements. A female agent was used to make contact and draw Reis toward a meeting. The exact details of how the meeting was arranged have not been fully disclosed in any official account, but Reis agreed to the encounter. On September 4, 1937, Reis was lured to a roadside location near Chamblin-Dechy, outside Lausanne, in Switzerland. He was shot multiple times. Swiss authorities found his body on the road. The examination confirmed he had been struck by 7 bullets. Swiss investigators opened a case. The trail pointed toward NK5D involvement, and several individuals connected to Soviet intelligence networks in Europe were identified as suspects in subsequent inquiries. The full chain of those who planned and ordered the operation was never prosecuted in a Swiss court. Ignace Reis was 37 years old. He had been in hiding for less than 2 months when he was killed. Ice axe in Mexico. Leon Trotsky was one of the founding figures of the Soviet state. By 1940, he was living in exile in Coyoacan, a district of Mexico City, having been expelled from the Soviet Union by Stalin more than a decade earlier. He continued writing and organizing from abroad, which made him a persistent target. The compound where Trotsky lived had been fortified. Guards were present. Access was controlled. Getting close to him required patience and a different approach. The KGB solution was Ramon Mercader, a trained agent who spent months embedding himself in the circles around Trotsky. He built relationships with people close to the household, presenting himself as a committed political sympathizer. Over time, he gained enough trust to be admitted into the compound as a known visitor. On August 20th, 1940, Mercader arrived at the compound carrying a document he said he wanted Trotsky to review. He was shown into the study. The two men were alone. Mercader had concealed an ice axe beneath his coat. While Trotsky sat at his desk, Mercader struck him in the head with it. Trotsky's guards responded immediately to the sound and rushed into the study. Mercader was seized on the spot and held until Mexican police arrived. Trotsky was taken to hospital. The injury was severe. He died the following day, on August 21st, 1940. Mexican authorities tried Mercader for the killing. He was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in prison, the maximum under Mexican law at the time. He served the full term. Upon his release, Mercader traveled to the Soviet Union. He was awarded the Hero of the Soviet Union Medal. Journalist shot in elevator Anna Politkovskaya was an investigative journalist based in Moscow. She had spent years reporting on the Chechen wars and documenting human rights abuses, work that had made her one of the most prominent and outspoken critics of the Kremlin inside Russia. On October 7, 2006, Politkovskaya went out to buy groceries. She returned to her apartment building in Moscow later that afternoon, carrying shopping bags, and stepped into the elevator. She was shot inside the elevator. Her body was found there shortly afterward, along with her groceries on the floor beside her. A pistol was recovered at the scene. Emergency services responded, but Politkovskaya was dead. The date was October 7th, Vladimir Putin's birthday. Russian authorities opened a murder investigation. Over the years that followed, the case moved slowly through the courts. 5 men were eventually convicted in connection with the killing, including the triggerman and others involved in organizing the operation on the ground. The question of who ordered the assassination was raised throughout the proceedings. It was never answered at trial. The individuals convicted represented the operational layer of the killing. Those who sat above them, who directed and commissioned the murder, were not identified or charged in any verdict that was made public. Politkovskaya had received threats before her death. She had also survived a suspected poisoning in 2004 after falling seriously ill on a flight while traveling to cover the Beslan school siege. She had continued reporting regardless. At the time she was killed, she was working on a report documenting alleged Russian military involvement in Chechnya. 5 people were convicted. The person or people who ordered her death remain unidentified in any official court record. Polonium in the T. Alexander Litvinenko was a former officer of Russia's FSB, the successor agency to the KGB. He had defected to Britain, settled in London, and become an open critic of the Kremlin. By 2006, he was working with British intelligence contacts and continuing to speak publicly about the FSB's activities. On November 1, 2006, Litvinenko met with 2 Russian contacts at the bar of the Millennium Hotel in Mayfair, central London. Their names were Andrei Lugovoy and Dmitry Kovtun. The meeting was unremarkable in appearance, men at a hotel bar talking. Within days, Litvinenko fell seriously ill. He was admitted to hospital as his condition deteriorated in ways that doctors struggled to identify. His hair fell out. His body failed progressively over the weeks that followed. Specialists were brought in. Tests were run. The cause was eventually confirmed as polonium-210 poisoning. Polonium-210 is a radioactive substance. It had been introduced into his tea during the Millennium Hotel meeting. The substance left a detectable trail. Investigators found traces of polonium across multiple locations in London that Litvinenko and his contacts had visited, including hotel rooms, offices, and aircraft seats used by Lugovoy and Kovtun on flights between London and Moscow. On November 23, 2006, Alexander Litvinenko died. He had survived for 22 days after the poisoning. A UK public inquiry concluded in 2016 that the operation was probably approved by FSB Director Nikolai Patrushev and by Vladimir Putin. Lugovoy and Kovtun remained in Russia. Neither was extradited. Lugovoy subsequently became a member of the Russian State Duma. No one has been prosecuted for the killing in any court.